I want to thank everyone for being here today. My name is Dianne Stringer, and I'd like to share with you a little bit about myself and what has brought me here today. When my mom met my dad, I think she hoped for things to be better for her and her 3 children. He too was a hard-working man. What he lacked in physical size, he made up for with fun-loving energy. My dad was fun. He enjoyed his newfound role, and we loved him. There were many camping trips and days on the beach. However, at times he turned into someone else. His rages, often fueled by liquor, became numerous, and I learned to live in fear of him. While my sisters and brother grew up to leave home, I remained with my mom, and though she had long since kicked him out, his presence in my life endured. My robust and adventurous nature, which I think I got from him, drew angry outbursts, and were met physically. My father grew up in one of the infamous boys' homes bordering Ontario and Quebec, where it was later revealed to house its own set of horrors and injustices. Knowledge of his own traumatic upbringing, his untreated alcoholism and bipolar disorder, later explained to me his behavior. But that came a day late and $1 short. By the time I was 8, that cute little kid had already begun to self-harm as a coping mechanism to deal with the trauma. Any remnants of childhood were cast out of me, and I learned to mimic his expressions of anger. I don't recall a life without gut-wrenching loneliness and illness. I always had a sense of being different, inferior, unlovable. I so craved what I thought I could never have, which was to belong. That sense of doubt radiated from me, I think, and my sadness invited my young peers to reinforce what my father convinced me of, that I was indeed unlovable. Undiagnosed learning disabilities that were masked and labeled as emotional problems only aided in feeling badly about myself, as I failed grades and was left behind. I was often told I was just oversensitive. Sure, maybe that was a part of it, but as we all know, kids can be mean, and I took every criticism, every taunt, every time I was picked last or not picked at all, or tricked by some childhood prank to heart, and it stings to this day. Later violated both physically and sexually by my mother's boyfriend as I was reaching puberty, ensured a life that would repeatedly spin out of control and find me on a psychiatric unit for the first time when I was around 14. Early diagnoses included schizophrenia, adjustment disorders, a whole variety of behavior disorders, depression, dissociative disorder, psychotic disorder. There were many. Even though I rather unsteadily stumbled into adulthood, I found my first real job as a healthcare aide and got married at 21. My daughter came along a couple years after that. However, my damaged well-being was coming at a cost to her in my marriage, so when she was around 2, while I was at the peak of my illness, I asked her father to take custody of her, and I returned to the only home I had, the mental health center in Penetang. There I worked on resolving the issues from my childhood with a counselor. Our sessions left me so dissociated that I think I lost who I was for a while. After about 6 months, I found a small apartment and left the hospital. I continued to see that counselor 3, sometimes 4 times a week. While the work was tough, grueling really, and the efforts well-intentioned, I think the rehashing of childhood wrongs fed into the same old maladaptive ways I had always used to survive my experience. It kept in my mind that my dad was indeed the boogeyman, and I grew to believe that he so damaged me that I could never break free of his clutches, even though he lived on the other end of the country. The 2-year-long relationship with my counselor became very counterproductive. When the relationship ended with what I perceived as ultimatums between continuation of therapy or being at my mom's bedside as she died of cancer, I thought I could never recover. Happening also at this time was a hearing with the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board related to the childhood abuse I survived just 1 week after the passing of my mom. Such polar events were monumental, and losing both my mom and my trusted counselor within a week of one another left me feeling abandoned, betrayed, guilty, and desperate. Again, I felt unlovable. Perhaps the favorable recognition by the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board aided and validated that I was truly a victim and now truly a survivor, that what I experienced was real and should not have happened. Having had that, I began to turn the corner. Through vocational rehabilitation at MHCP, I began working in the woodshop, creating folk art and selling some of my works to hospital staff and at craft fairs. Illness had its grip through this time, but I was starting to reawaken to my life. Concurrent to this was the birth of the Patient Consumer and Family Council, and I was soon working alongside the council as an aide. I started to become versed in the language of mental health consumerism and learned how to use a computer. My relationship with the hospital shifted. Yes, I was still a patient on both an inpatient and outpatient basis, but I was also part of something bigger. I saw the hospital differently, and I think they saw me differently too. When my daughter was around 8, she came to live with me again. I was stronger now. She has been a huge influence in me finding a life worth living, and even though I could talk about her and our wonderful relationship for hours, for the purposes of this talk, I'll refrain from doing so. So too have I reunited with my husband, who I haven't spoke much about, but who has been at my side through many of my ups and downs. I now had a counselor and a psychiatrist who I connected with, who saw me through and knew how I ticked. Unfortunately, because of some bad decisions and incompatible circumstances with the council, I lost my job in 1999. But everything happens for a reason. I was given the opportunity to work as a peer support worker at Our Place Social Club, and I remained there until I was hired by the council a couple of years ago as the peer support coordinator, administrative assistant, and more recently, recovery educator. I had the huge honor of delivering peer support education to a group of folks through a Trillium grant that partnered our council with the Ontario Peer Development Initiative. All of this has been hugely rewarding. So my story goes back quite a while. I have had, if you were to put all of my hospital admissions on a string, well over 2 years of inpatient time, and that is fewer because of the therapeutic relationships I've been able to forge with the clinicians through outpatient services of the hospital. For me, I found the support I needed. I was never told by service providers that I would always be ill. It was just the opposite. I was told I could do so much, but I didn't believe it. It took me a long time to get over my adolescence. In so many ways I feel I am just now entering into adulthood. This time around I had supportive, loving, and forgiving people who were nudging me to develop the tools I needed to proactively chart my course. I couldn't be here without the consistency coupled with real, empathetic understanding and kindness from the clinical staff. I've discovered a stability I once thought impossible. That doesn't mean I am always free of symptoms, whether they be of a depressive nature or have elements of a psychotic experience. Peer support, talk therapy, and medications have been the key to my transformation. Lately, I've participated in a lot of recovery education around the peer support concept, and I've discovered friendship. What a blessing. If there is one thing I want to drive home to everyone, is that recovery doesn't happen in a day, a week, a month, or even a year. It happens minute to minute, second to second, and it takes work. The personal investment needs to start with you. Only then can others really climb on board and help you through the challenges that mental illness and addictions require you to face. And it is possible. Pages turn and we live our lives. The hand we're dealt may not always be fair, not always perfect, and not without pain, but it can be approached with hope, with wellness, with recovery, and with love. Maya Angelou's poem, Touched by an Angel, comes to mind when I ponder these life experiences. We, unaccustomed to courage, exiles from delight, live coiled in shells of loneliness, until love leaves its high holy temple and comes into our sight to liberate us into life. I have drawn on the memory of that poem many a time, and it holds true now more than ever. I have been liberated into living my life with hope, integrity, support, and love. Thank you for listening.